Today, we're going to talk about a force that is so powerful, it can lead some of the most brilliant people on the planet to make absolutely disastrous decisions. It's a phenomenon that hides in plain sight, and we often mistake it for great teamwork or unity. It's called groupthink.
It's the kind of question that haunts boardrooms, mission control centers, and even the highest levels of government. You've got all the experts, you have all the data, you have all these incredible minds in one room, and yet the result is a complete and utter failure. How does that even happen?
Well, the thing is, it's not about a lack of intelligence. It's something much more subtle. It's a psychological trap that groups can fall into when the pressure to agree becomes more important than being right. And to really understand this trap, we need to look at one of history's most tragic examples.
So to see just how high the stakes can get, we have to go all the way back to a freezing cold morning in January of 1986.
So, on the morning of the launch, engineers were voicing some really urgent concerns. They knew that the cold weather could cause the O-rings, these critical seals on the rocket boosters, to fail. But the pressure to launch, to just stick to the schedule, was just immense. The warnings were heard, they were discussed, but ultimately they were set aside. And then, 73 seconds after liftoff, those engineers' worst fears came true in front of the entire world.
And that quote on the screen? That's the exact phrase the engineers used to describe what could happen hours before they launched. A group of smart managers heard that warning, they understood the risk, and they still made the collective decision to go ahead. It's just a textbook and absolutely heartbreaking example of the phenomenon we're exploring today.
So, what do you even call a total breakdown in decision-making like that? Well, it turns out there's a name for it, and a psychologist who defined it for all of us.
It's called groupthink. The term was developed by a Yale psychologist named Irving Janis, and he described it as this mode of thinking that just takes over when the desire to agree is so dominant that it completely overrides any realistic look at the other options. Basically, it's when getting along fatally trumps getting it right.
Now, Giannis wasn't just guessing here. He basically became a historical detective. He dug into these massive historical failures, like the disastrous Bay of Pigs invasion, where a deeply flawed plan was accepted with almost no debate. He studied the intelligence failures before Pearl Harbor, and in all of these events, he saw the same pattern, the same warning signs popping up again and again.
And this table right here breaks down the 8 specific symptoms that Janis found. They kind of fall into 3 big buckets. First, there's this intense pressure for uniformity. This is where people start censoring themselves, hiding their doubts. And then, silence gets mistaken for agreement. That's the illusion of unanimity. If someone does speak up, they get a ton of pressure to fall back in line. And you even get these mind guards who protect the group from any outside info that might challenge them. The second bucket is closed-mindedness. This is where the group starts rationalizing away any warnings. Sound familiar? And they start stereotyping anyone who disagrees as weak or biased. And all this leads to the third problem, an overestimation of the group's own power. They start feeling this illusion of invulnerability, and they get this belief in their own unquestioned morality. They just think, there's no way we can be wrong.
Now, what's really wild is that Janis figured out there are basically 3 ingredients that create the perfect storm for groupthink. First, you've got a really tight-knit group, where everyone's friends and nobody wants to rock the boat. Second, you have structural problems, like the team is totally isolated, where the leader shares their opinion way too early. And third, you throw in a super high-stress situation where the pressure to make a quick decision is just through the roof. The Challenger launch had all 3, in spades.
But here's the kicker. This isn't just about bad meetings or flawed group dynamics. It's actually hardwired into our biology. Let's take a look at what's happening inside our brains when we're faced with that kind of social pressure. So, some researchers wanted to see this in action, right? The real-world effect of peer pressure. So they took a group of adolescent males who are already known for taking risks and put them inside a really realistic driving simulator. And the results were, well, they were night and day. When they were driving solo, the guys were relatively cautious. But the second a friend who encouraged risky behavior was in the passenger seat, their driving changed completely. They started running more yellow lights and spent way more time just sitting in dangerous intersections. And just think about that for a second. The peer didn't even have to say, go faster or anything. Their mere presence, just being there, was enough to significantly increase dangerous behavior. But why?
It all comes down to this battle happening inside our heads. See, you've got the ventral striatum, which is basically the brain's go for it button. It lights up when it's seeking a reward, like social approval from your friends. Then you have the insula, which is your internal alarm system, screaming, danger, or this is a bad idea. What the research shows is that peer pressure basically hijacks this whole system. It cranks up the volume on the go for it signal while turning down the volume on the alarm system. The desire to fit in literally becomes more powerful than the perception of risk. And this isn't just for teenagers, it's happening in mission control too, where the desire to be accepted by your powerful peers can be just as intense.
Okay, so if our brains are basically wired to fall into this trap, are we just doomed? How do you break the spell? Well, the good news is it is possible. And for the answer, we can look to another really high-stakes moment from history.
Remember the Bay of Pigs invasion we mentioned earlier? It was one of Janus's original case studies for groupthink. The plan was a total disaster, and the Kennedy administration was completely humiliated. But President Kennedy, he learned from it. He learned a massive lesson about the danger of surrounding yourself with people who just nod along.
And he didn't just cross his fingers and hope for the best next time. No, he fundamentally changed his team's decision-making process. He put in place what became known as vigilant appraisal, a structured system designed to encourage critical thinking and, yes, even disagreement.
And boy, was that new process put to the test. Just a year later, the world is staring down the barrel of the Cuban Missile Crisis. The stakes were even higher, the world on the brink of nuclear war. The pressure was unimaginable. But this time, the way they made decisions was a whole new ballgame.
So how do you actually prevent groupthink? Here are some of the key tactics, and a lot of them are exactly what Kennedy's team put into action. For starters, you can actually assign every single person the role of critical evaluator. Crucially, the leader has to keep their own opinion to themselves at the beginning so they don't influence the room. You bring in outside experts whose whole job is to poke holes in your logic, and you can even appoint an official devil's advocate, someone whose job is to argue against whatever the popular opinion is.
And this wasn't just theory for JFK. He actually did this stuff. He would literally leave the room during early talks so people would feel free to speak their minds. He brought in outsiders to challenge their thinking. He'd even break his main team into smaller groups to stop one single mindset from taking over. He actively encouraged dissent instead of punishing it. He basically built a system where it was not only safe to disagree, it was expected. And the result? They navigated one of the scariest moments in human history and found a peaceful way out.
So all of this leaves us with a really important question to ask ourselves. Think about the last time you were in a meeting or with your team, and everyone was in total agreement on something big. Was that true hard-won consensus that came from a real debate? Or was it the quiet, dangerous kind of agreement? Were you all genuinely on the same page, or were you just avoiding conflict? It's something to think about.